Have you ever lived in the same house with the people you love and still felt far away from them? Have you ever sat at the same dinner table, heard the same voices, shared the same space, but somehow felt invisible? When was the last time you truly listened? Not to reply, not to defend, not to correct, but simply to understand? And what if the distance in your family is not caused by one big mistake, but by many small reactions? For a long time, I believed my family was drifting apart because life was busy. Work was demanding, schedules were full, everyone was tired. That was the explanation I repeated to myself. It sounded reasonable, responsible, mature. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't the whole truth. The real problem wasn't time. It was tension, small moments, small disagreements, with small misunderstandings. None of them dramatic, none of them explosive, but each one left a thin layer of distance. My wife would say something simple, I would respond quickly. Too quickly, not aggressively, just automatically. She would suggest an idea. I would point out a problem. She would express a feeling. I would explain why it didn't make sense. I thought I was being logical, helpful, efficient, but I wasn't listening. I was correcting. There is a difference, and that difference slowly creates space between two people. At dinner, conversations became shorter, practical, surface level. How was work? Fine. What about you? Busy. Our child would speak, and sometimes I would nod without fully hearing. My mind would already be thinking about tomorrow, about unfinished tasks, about solutions. Always solutions. I believed my role was to fix, to improve, to guide. But no one had asked for a manager. They needed presence. One evening, a small argument happened, not about anything serious, just a minor decision about the weekend. But the tone changed. Her voice became quieter, not louder, quieter. And that scared me more than anger, because quiet can mean withdrawal. She said something that stayed with me. You don't really hear me anymore. I wanted to defend myself, to explain, to list all the things I do for this family. But something stopped me, because deep down, I knew she wasn't talking about tasks. She was talking about connection. That night, the house felt unusually silent, not peaceful, heavy. I sat alone in the living room, lights off, just thinking. When did we start reacting instead of relating? When did conversations become debates? When did I start treating emotions like problems to solve? I realized something uncomfortable. I was always trying to be right, even in small things, correct details, correct opinions, correct interpretations. And every time I corrected, even politely, I was choosing ego over empathy. Not intentionally, not cruelly, just habitually. Habits are powerful. They build closeness, or they build distance. There is no neutral habit in relationships. The next morning, nothing dramatic happened. No big apology, no emotional speech, just breakfast, coffee, silence. But inside me, a quiet awareness was forming. Maybe the problem was not that we had grown apart. Maybe we had stopped choosing each other in small moments. Love is not only built in big sacrifices, it is built in daily responses, in tone, in timing, in patience. I started observing myself that day. When she spoke, I noticed the urge to interrupt. When she expressed frustration, I noticed the urge to fix. When she shared a thought, I noticed the urge to improve it. Each urge felt automatic, like a reflex. And reflexes are fast, but connection is slow. I began to ask myself a simple question. What would happen if I didn't react immediately? What if I paused? What if instead of correcting, I listened? Not passively, but fully. The idea felt small, almost insignificant. How could a pause change anything? But I remembered something I had learned before. Small shifts, repeated consistently, reshape relationships. That evening, another ordinary conversation happened. She mentioned feeling tired lately. Normally, I would respond with advice. Maybe you should sleep earlier. Maybe reduce your workload. Maybe exercise more. This time, I did something different. I stayed quiet, not distant, present. I looked at her, and I said, "That sounds exhausting." Nothing more, just acknowledgement. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. She continued speaking, more openly, more honestly. For the first time in weeks, the conversation didn't feel like negotiation. It felt like connection. And in that moment, I understood something profound. The distance between us was not created by conflict. It was created by constant correction. Correction sounds harmless, but when repeated daily, it slowly says, "I know better," even when you don't mean it that way. That night, I made a quiet decision, not announced, not dramatic, just internal. I would choose understanding over being right, not once, not occasionally, but consistently. I didn't know if it would fix everything. I didn't know how long it would take, but I knew one thing clearly. If I kept reacting the same way, nothing would change. And maybe, just maybe, this small decision was the first step toward bringing us closer again. There are moments in life when nothing explodes. No shouting, no doors slammed, no dramatic goodbye. And yet, something inside you quietly shifts. The morning after my quiet decision, nothing looked different. The kitchen was still the same small space filled with pale light. The refrigerator still hummed. The clock still ticked with calm indifference. My wife still stood at the sink, and my daughter still sat at the table scrolling on her phone. If someone had walked into our home, they would have said, "Everything looks normal." But I knew something had changed, not in them, in me. For years, I believed leadership in a family meant direction. It meant fixing. It meant providing solutions before problems grew too large. If my daughter struggled in school, I researched strategies. If my wife seemed tired, I suggested plans. If money felt tight, I worked longer hours. I believed love was measured in action, movement, efficiency, correction. But I had never asked myself one simple question. Was anyone asking me to fix them, or were they asking me to hear them? That morning, I did something small, so small it almost felt foolish. I sat down at the table instead of pacing around it. I did not check my phone. I did not glance at emails. I did not mentally rehearse my schedule. I just sat, and I listened. Not to words, to the room, to the air, to the distance between us. It felt uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that no longer fit. My daughter looked up first. She seemed surprised that I was not rushing. "Are you late for work?" she asked. Her tone was not curious. It was confused, because my absence had become predictable, even when I was physically there. "I'm fine," I said, and for the first time, I meant something different by it. I did not mean, "I'm busy but functioning." I meant, "I'm here." She shrugged and went back to her phone, but she sat a little straighter. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I noticed. My wife dried her hands and sat down too. She did not speak. And we had grown used to silence, but our silence had not been peaceful. It had been protective. We each stayed in our own corner of it. That morning, I didn't fill it. I did not ask logistical questions. I did not discuss bills. I did not comment on the weather. I just allowed it to exist. without fear. Have you ever noticed how quickly we rush to fill silence, as if silence is dangerous, as if it might reveal something we are not ready to face? I had been afraid of silence because silence might show me the truth, that my family did not need a manager. They needed a presence. Later that evening, something unexpected happened. My daughter came into the living room where I was reading. Usually, she would stay in her room, headphones on, door half closed. But that night, she stood near the doorway. "Dad," she said. I looked up, and I waited. I did not offer advice. I did not prepare an answer. I simply waited. "I don't think I want to join the advanced math class next semester." There it was, a confession, small but heavy. The old version of me would have reacted immediately. "Why not? It's good for your future. You're capable. You shouldn't limit yourself." I had said these things before, many times, and each time I watched her shoulders tighten, but this time I remembered my decision. Not to control, not to rush, not to correct. Instead, I asked, "How does that make you feel?" She blinked, as if recalculating. "Nervous," she said. "Like if I fail, everyone will know I'm not as smart as they think." Her voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. And in that moment, I realized something painful. And she had not been afraid of math. She had been afraid of disappointing me. I felt a weight in my chest. How many times had my expectations sounded like encouragement? How many times had my pride sounded like pressure? I had never meant to push her into fear. I thought I was pushing her toward opportunity. But intention does not erase impact. "You don't have to prove anything to me," I said slowly, and I meant it. "For the first time, I am proud of who you are, not your grades." She stared at me, not because the sentence was dramatic, but because it was unfamiliar. Parents often say they love their children, but children listen for something deeper. "Do you love me when I succeed? Or do you love me when I struggle?" She nodded once, then twice, and something softened in her eyes. It was not excitement. It was relief. That night, I sat alone after everyone went to bed, and I asked myself a difficult question. Why had it taken me so long to understand this? The answer was uncomfortable. Because I was raised the same way. Achievement meant safety. Excellence meant belonging. If you performed well, you were valued. If you stumbled, you corrected yourself quickly. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. So I had unknowingly repeated the pattern, not out of cruelty, out of habit. Breaking a pattern is not loud. It is quiet. It happens in tiny choices, in pauses, in questions instead of answers. The next few days were not magical. There were still disagreements. There were still tired evenings. There were still moments when I almost slipped back into old habits. But now, I noticed them. And noticing is powerful. When my wife mentioned feeling overwhelmed at work, I did not offer solutions immediately. I asked, "Do you want advice or do you just want me to listen?" She laughed. "Just listen," she said. So I did. And for the first time in years, she spoke without editing herself, without rushing, without simplifying her emotions so I could digest them quickly. I realized something important. My family had not grown distant because of conflict. We had grown distant because of speed. We were moving too fast to truly see each other, too focused on outcomes, not focused enough on understanding. Slowing down felt inefficient, but it felt honest. And honesty has its own rhythm, a slower one, a deeper one. One evening, we ate dinner without the television on, no announcement, no rule. I simply turned it off. My daughter looked up. "Is it broken?" No, I smiled. I just wanted to hear your voice. She rolled her eyes playfully, but she talked about school, about a friend, about something funny that happened, and my wife added her own stories. We laughed, not loudly, but genuinely. It felt unfamiliar, like discovering an old photograph of ourselves smiling years ago. Proof that connection once existed, and still could. I began to understand that closeness is not built through control. It is built through safety. When people feel safe, they open. When they open, they connect. And when they connect, they trust. The quiet decision I made was not heroic. It did not require money. It did not require grand gestures. It required humility. To admit that I did not always know what was best, to admit that listening could be more powerful than leading. To admit that love sometimes means stepping back. Have you ever tried to fix someone when they only wanted to be heard? Have you ever mistaken guidance for pressure? Have you ever loved someone deeply, yet accidentally made them feel small? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are honest ones. A week after my decision, my daughter came home with a test result. She placed it on the table casually. I did okay, she said. I looked at the grade. It was good. Not perfect. Good. The old reflex inside me wanted to analyze it, to compare it to previous scores, to strategize improvements. But I stopped. I'm proud of you for trying, I said. Her smile this time was immediate, not cautious, not searching, just warm. And that is when I knew something real was changing. Not because our problems disappeared, but because our foundation felt steadier, less fragile, less performance-based. My wife later told me something that stayed with me. You feel different, she said. Calmer? I thought about that. I did not feel calmer. I felt more aware, more intentional. Perhaps that looks like calm from the outside. I used to believe that strength in a family meant holding everything together tightly. Now I understand. Real strength is knowing when to loosen your grip, to allow others to breathe, to grow, to choose. The quiet decision was not about surrender. It was about trust. Trusting that my family did not need constant correction. Trusting that love is not measured in productivity. I'm trusting that connection grows best in spaces where people are free to be imperfect. And as the days moved forward, something subtle continued to shift, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, like a slow sunrise. You do not notice the exact second the darkness fades, but suddenly you realize the room is brighter, warmer, safer, and you are no longer standing alone inside it. Change does not announce itself. It does not ring a bell or ask for attention. It moves quietly, like light slowly stretching across the floor in the early morning. By the third week after my quiet decision, I began to notice something unexpected. The house sounded different, not louder, not busier, just softer. There were still footsteps, still doors opening and closing, still the clink of plates and the hum of the washing machine. But the tension that once lived underneath those sounds had faded. Before, every small noise felt sharp, like something might break at any moment. Now, the sounds blended together, gentler, more natural. And I realized something important. Peace is not the absence of activity. It is the absence of fear. One Saturday afternoon, my daughter asked if I could drive her to a bookstore across town. She usually preferred going with friends, so I was surprised. Sure, I said. No questions, no conditions, just yes. The drive was quiet at first, the comfortable kind of quiet. She looked out the window. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel. I felt the urge to start a conversation, to make the time useful, to turn the drive into a lesson about something, but I resisted. Presence does not need performance. Halfway there, she spoke. Dad, were you always confident when you were my age? The question caught me off guard. Confident. I almost laughed, but I understood what she was really asking. She was not asking about confidence. She was asking about doubt. I pretended to be, I admitted. That's different. She turned toward me slightly. You pretended? Yes. I paused, choosing honesty over pride. I thought if I showed uncertainty, people would respect me less. She nodded slowly. I feel like that sometimes. In the past, I might have rushed to reassure her. You're amazing. You have nothing to worry about. But reassurance without understanding feels empty. So instead, I asked, what makes you feel that way? And she talked about social expectations, about comparing herself to classmates, about feeling like everyone else already knew who they were becoming. And as she spoke, I realized something. She was not just sharing information. She was sharing vulnerability. That only happens when someone feels safe. When we reached the bookstore, she did something small but meaningful. She handed me a book. You might like this, she said. It was about emotional intelligence. I smiled. I'll read it. That simple exchange felt like a bridge, not between parent and child, but between two people learning together. Later that evening, something similar happened with my wife. We were folding laundry, a task we had done thousands of times, usually in silence or distracted by television. But that night, she said quietly, I've been thinking about changing departments at work. In the past, I would have immediately analyzed the practical side, salary, stability, long-term impact. Instead, I asked, what's drawing you to that? She hesitated. Then she said, I think I've been afraid to admit that I'm unhappy. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried years of quiet compromise. I felt a wave of recognition. How many times had I been afraid to admit unhappiness? How many times had I hidden it behind responsibility? I don't want you to stay somewhere just because it feels safe, I said. She looked at me carefully, as if testing whether I truly meant it. You're not worried? She asked. I'm more worried about you shrinking than about you changing, I replied. The words surprised even me, because they were true, and truth spoken gently has weight. That night, after everyone slept, I sat alone again, what not in loneliness, in reflection. I realized that the quiet decision I made was not only affecting my family, it was changing me. I was no longer performing the role of strong father or practical husband. I was becoming something simpler, a human being among other human beings, equal in uncertainty, equal in growth. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to always be the one who knows, to always have the answer, to always carry certainty? I had been tired for years, but I called it responsibility. I called it adulthood. I called it strength. Now I see that true strength includes the courage to say, I don't know, and still remain steady. One evening, my daughter knocked on my office door. I didn't get the highest score in class, she said. There was no fear in her voice, just information. And how do you feel about that? I asked. She shrugged lightly. Okay, I did my best. And that was it. No spiral, no anxiety, no desperate need for approval, just calm acceptance. I realized something powerful. When pressure leaves a room, confidence grows naturally. The shift in our family was not dramatic. There were no grand speeches, no emotional breakdowns followed by hugs. Instead, there were small, consistent choices, listening before speaking, asking before advising, pausing before reacting. One night at dinner, my wife said something that stayed with me. "I feel like we're actually on the same team again." The sentence was simple, but it carried years of distance. I had not realized how much my constant fixing had felt like criticism, even when it was well-intentioned. When you are always improving something, you silently suggest it is not enough, and people begin to feel the same about themselves. So I practiced something new: gratitude without correction. When my daughter cleaned the kitchen halfway, I thanked her. I did not point out the missed spots. When my wife tried a new recipe that was slightly overcooked, I appreciated the effort. I did not suggest adjustments. Perfection is not the foundation of closeness. Acceptance is. Of course, I was not perfect in this new approach. There were moments I slipped. One afternoon, stress from work followed me home. I almost snapped at my daughter for leaving her shoes in the hallway. The old impatience rose quickly. But instead of reacting, I paused. I took a breath. And I realized the frustration was not about shoes. It was about my own exhaustion. So I said, "Can you help me by moving these? I've had a long day." She moved them without defensiveness, because my tone was different. Tone changes everything. The same sentence can wound or connect depending on how it is carried. Weeks passed. The air in our home continued to feel lighter, not because life became easier, but because we were no longer guarding ourselves from each other. Guarding consumes energy. Trust restores it. One Sunday morning, we decided to walk together in the nearby park. It was unplanned. We simply stepped outside. The sky was pale blue, the air cool. We walked slowly. No headphones, no rushing. At one point, my daughter walked between us. She slipped her hands into ours, a gesture she had not made in years. It lasted only a minute. But it spoke more than words. It said, "I feel safe here." And I understood something deeply. Children do not drift away because they want distance. They drift when connection feels conditional, when love feels tied to performance, when conversations feel like evaluations. Remove those conditions, and closeness returns naturally. The quiet decision had begun as something personal, an internal shift, but now I saw its wider impact. Leadership in a family is not about control. It is about creating emotional safety. It is about modeling humility. It is about choosing connection over ego. I used to think that growth required pressure. Now I believe growth requires permission. Permission to fail, permission to change, permission to speak honestly, permission to be human. Have you ever tried to create closeness by tightening your grip? Have you ever confused high standards with high expectations? Have you ever loved someone deeply but unknowingly made them feel measured? These questions are not accusations. They are invitations. Invitations to reflect, to soften, to adjust quietly. One evening, as I turned off the lights downstairs, I noticed something simple. The house felt like a place of rest again, not a place of evaluation, not a place of constant improvement, just home. The quiet decision I made did not fix every problem, but it changed the direction of our steps. Instead of pulling ahead, I began walking beside. Instead of instructing, I began listening. Instead of managing outcomes, I began nurturing trust. And trust, once planted, grows slowly, silently, steadily, with like roots beneath the surface. You may not see them every day, but they hold everything together. There is a stage in change that feels almost invisible. Nothing dramatic happens. No breakthrough conversation, no tearful apologies, just consistency. And consistency is quiet work. By the fourth week, I began to understand something deeper. The decision I made was not only about how I spoke, it was about how I saw my family. For years, I had looked at them through a lens of improvement. How can this be better? How can she grow faster? How can we optimize this situation? Improvement is not wrong. But when improvement becomes the dominant lens, appreciation slowly disappears. You start seeing what is missing instead of what is present, and people feel that difference. One evening, I sat in the living room while my wife read on the couch. My daughter was lying on the floor drawing something in a notebook. The television was off. The windows were slightly open. A soft breeze moved the curtains. Nothing special was happening. And yet, I felt something unfamiliar. Contentment, not pride, not accomplishment. Just quiet satisfaction. The kind that does not need to be posted or proven, just felt. I realized that for a long time, I had attached my happiness to milestones, good grades, promotions, financial goals, future plans. But here we were, simply existing together, and it was enough. My daughter suddenly looked up. Dad, do you ever regret choices you made when you were younger? The question was unexpected, but I noticed she was not asking out of curiosity alone. She was exploring her own fears. Yes, I said honestly, I regret some things. She waited, so I continued. I regret times when I chose being right over being kind. Her eyes softened slightly. Like what? Like correcting someone when they were already trying their best. The room became very still, not tense, just thoughtful. She nodded slowly. I don't want to regret that kind of thing. You won't, I said gently, because you're already thinking about it. In that moment, I understood something important. Children do not learn from our perfection. They learn from our reflection. Later that night, my wife and I talked in the kitchen after our daughter went to bed. We leaned against the counter. No agenda, no conflict to resolve, just conversation. I feel like we're rebuilding something, she said, and not from scratch, but from the inside. Her words stayed with me, rebuilding from the inside. That is exactly what it felt like. We were not changing our house. We were changing its emotional foundation. There was a time when our conversations revolved around logistics, schedules, expenses, deadlines. Now we talked about feelings again, not dramatically, just honestly. She told me she had been afraid to express dissatisfaction at work because she did not want to appear ungrateful. I told her I had often hidden my own stress because I believed vulnerability would weaken my authority. We both laughed gently at how similar our fears had been. Two adults protecting each other from truths that could have brought us closer sooner. Isn't that strange? We hide what connects us. One afternoon, I made a mistake. A real one. Work had been overwhelming. A project fell behind schedule. I came home distracted and irritated. My daughter asked me a simple question about a school event. I responded too sharply. Her face changed immediately. The softness disappeared. Silence returned. The old kind. Heavy. For a moment, I felt the familiar instinct to defend myself. I've had a long day. You don't understand the pressure. But instead, I stopped. I walked to her room. I knocked. And when she opened the door, I said, I'm sorry. That tone wasn't fair. She looked surprised, not because I apologized, but because I did it quickly, without excuses. It's okay, she said. No, I replied gently. It's not about okay. It's about respect. Her shoulders relaxed, and I saw clearly how fragile progress can feel. Not fragile in structure, but fragile in attention. Connection requires maintenance, not perfection. maintenance. That evening, I reflected again. The quiet decision was not a single moment, it was a daily choice, sometimes hourly, sometimes minute by minute, to respond instead of react, to understand instead of control, to value people over outcomes. Have you ever noticed how quickly ego enters small conversations? A correction, a sarcastic remark, a dismissive gesture. They seem insignificant, but repeated over time, they build walls. And walls are rarely built in one day. They are built brick by brick, word by word, tone by tone. I began to observe something beautiful in our home. My daughter started expressing disagreement more freely, not rebellion, honest disagreement. She would say, I see it differently. And instead of feeling challenged, I felt proud. Because she was thinking. Because she trusted the space enough to speak. That is growth. Not obedience. Confidence. My wife also seemed lighter. She submitted her request to change departments at work, something she had postponed for months. When she told me, her voice carried excitement and nervousness, but not fear. I feel supported, she said, and that sentence mattered more to me than any professional success. Support is not loud, it is steady, it does not dominate, it stands beside. One Sunday afternoon, we decided to cook together, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. The kitchen became slightly chaotic, flour on the counter, music playing softly, laughter when something spilled. At one point, my daughter accidentally dropped a bowl. It cracked on the floor. We all froze for a second. Then she looked at me, waiting. Perhaps remembering how I once reacted to broken things, I smiled. It's just a bowl. Relief spread across her face. We cleaned it up together, and something deeper than ceramic had remained unbroken: safety. I used to think authority required control. Now I understand it requires emotional stability. When the leader of a family is calm, others breathe easier. When the leader listens, others speak. When the leader admits fault, others trust. Authority rooted in fear creates distance. Authority rooted in humility creates connection. Weeks ago, our home felt like a place of silent expectations. Now it feels like a place of honest effort. We are not perfect. We still disagree. We still misunderstand sometimes, but misunderstandings no longer threaten the foundation. They are simply moments to navigate together. One evening, as I turned off the lights downstairs, my daughter hugged me unexpectedly. Thanks for being different lately, she whispered. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. Different did not mean softer. It meant more present, more patient, more aware, more human. As I stood alone afterward, I realized something profound. The quiet decision that brought my family closer was not about changing them. It was about confronting my own fear: fear of losing control, fear of being unnecessary, fear of appearing weak. When I let go of those fears, space opened, and in that space, connection grew. Have you ever considered that the distance in your relationships might not require a dramatic fix? Maybe it requires a pause, a question asked gently, an apology offered quickly, an expectation released silently. Big transformations often begin with small courage. The house tonight feels warm, not because of temperature, but because of trust. Trust built slowly, through listening, through humility, through consistency. And as I sit in the quiet once again, I understand that closeness is not something you demand. It is something you cultivate, patiently, carefully, every single day. There is a moment in every quiet transformation when you finally realize this is not temporary. This is not a phase. This is becoming who we are. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. No celebration, no announcement. Just an ordinary day. I came home a little earlier than usual. The sky was turning orange outside the windows. I could hear soft laughter from the kitchen before I even stepped inside. Not loud, not forced, just natural. When I walked in, my wife and daughter were standing close together, talking while preparing dinner. They did not stop when I entered. They did not shift the mood. They simply looked up and smiled, and something in that moment felt whole. Weeks ago, I would have entered with an invisible checklist in my mind. What needs to be done? What went wrong today? What should we improve? Now I entered with one simple intention: be here, fully. Smells good, I said. My daughter handed me a spoon. Try this. I tasted it. It needed a little salt. The old version of me would have said that immediately. Instead, I asked, "What do you think it needs?" She tasted it again thoughtfully. Maybe salt? I smiled. Let's try. It was a small exchange, but it mattered. Guidance without domination, support without superiority. After dinner, we stayed at the table longer than usual. No one rushed away. No one retreated to separate rooms. We talked about small things: a funny story from work, a class presentation, a neighbor's new dog, ordinary conversation, but woven with ease, no hidden tension, no careful editing of words, just flow. At one point, my wife looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." I thought about that. Not happier, not more successful, just lighter. Yes, I said slowly. I stopped trying to carry everything alone. She reached for my hand under the table, and I realized something profound. When you stop carrying control, you create room for partnership. Later that evening, my daughter sat beside me on the couch. She rested her head on my shoulder, something she had not done in years. We watched nothing in particular, just sat. After a few minutes, she spoke quietly. "I feel like I can tell you things now." The sentence was simple, but it carried the weight of trust rebuilt. "You always could," I replied gently. She shook her head slightly. "No." Before, I felt like I had to be impressive. The honesty in her voice was not accusatory. It was reflective. And I accepted it without defense. "I'm sorry if I made you feel that way," I said. "You don't anymore," she answered. And that was enough. That night, when the house became still, I sat in the dim light of the living room and reflected on everything that had changed. Nothing dramatic had happened. There were no grand gestures, no emotional speeches, just daily adjustments. Tone softened, listening increased, expectations released, apologies offered quickly, encouragement given without pressure. And over time, those small shifts accumulated, like drops of water slowly filling a glass, until one day the glass is full, not of perfection, but of peace. I used to believe that being a strong father meant preparing my family for a difficult world. Now I believe it means preparing our home to be a safe place from that world, a place where mistakes are not magnified, where feelings are not minimized, where questions are welcomed, where silence is not feared. That kind of home does not happen automatically. It is built intentionally, through humility, through awareness, through courage to change patterns inherited long ago. Have you ever noticed how easily we repeat what we were taught, even when it did not serve us? I once believed pressure created excellence. Now I see that security creates resilience. Pressure might produce short-term results, but security produces long-term strength. A few days later, my wife received confirmation. Her department change was approved. She came home with nervous excitement in her eyes. "I did it," she said softly. I did not analyze risks. I did not calculate consequences. I hugged her. I'm proud of you. And I meant it without conditions. Her success was not about strategy. It was about courage. And courage deserves support. The following weekend, we visited the same park where we had walked weeks before. This time, the air felt warmer. We walked side by side again. At one point, my daughter walked ahead slightly, confident, relaxed, not carrying invisible pressure, just herself. And I realized that closeness does not mean holding tightly. It means walking near enough to be present, far enough to allow growth. As we sat on a bench watching the sky change colors, my daughter asked, Dad, what made you change? I thought carefully before answering. I realized that I was trying to protect our future by controlling the present. She looked at me thoughtfully. And now? Now I trust that love is stronger than control. She nodded slowly. I like this version of you. I laughed softly. I like this version of me too. The quiet decision that brought my family closer again was not dramatic. It was not visible to the outside world. No one applauded, no one noticed except us. But inside our home, everything shifted. We speak more openly. We apologize more quickly. We laugh more easily. We sit together longer. And perhaps most importantly, we no longer feel evaluated by each other. We feel accepted. If you are listening to this and wondering whether small changes matter, let me tell you something gentle but true. They matter more than you think. The way you respond tonight, the tone you choose tomorrow morning, the pause before you criticize, the question you ask instead of assuming. These are seeds, and seeds grow, slowly, quietly, but powerfully. You do not need to rebuild your entire life overnight. You do not need dramatic confrontation. You do not need perfect communication. You only need one honest decision, repeated consistently, with humility, with patience, with love. As I sit here now, the house is quiet again. But this silence feels different from before. It is not distance. It is comfort. It is trust resting peacefully. And I understand something clearly. Closeness is not created by force. It is created by safety, and safety begins within the one willing to change first. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt distance in your own home, if you are quietly considering a small change, I hope you remember this. You do not have to change everything. You only have to begin, gently, patiently, today. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me. If this story brought you reflection or comfort, consider sharing it with someone who might need it. And if you would like more calm stories about growth, family, and quiet strength, stay with us here on English Quiet Power. We move slowly, we listen deeply, and we grow together.